It's shocking how much Trump got away with during his one term in office, and it's left many people wondering how much more anti-democratic could he get? And then people discovered this. Project 2025. It's an ambitious 920-page blueprint for a possible second Trump administration, spearheaded by the conservative think tank called the Heritage Foundation. This is filled with brazen policy proposals that seek to advance many ultra-conservative goals, including detailed plans on how to overhaul the federal government. Throughout this special hour of Velshi, we're going to take a closer look at what exactly is inside Project 2025, because it's important that we all understand the direction in which the conservative movement wants to take the country. One chapter in this massive tome, for example, is solely dedicated to further restrictions on reproductive rights, which includes a proposal to ban the distribution of medication abortion and contraceptives that relies on a long dormant law from 1873 that's still on the books. It also lays out how Trump as president could take control of the Department of Justice and direct the agency to do his bidding, including perhaps exacting retribution against his perceived enemies. Project 2025 also seeks to achieve one of the conservative movement's longtime goals, the dismantling of the administrative state, which could involve the elimination of many federal agencies, tens of thousands of federal workers losing their jobs, and a massive shift in the balance of power in Washington. The concept behind 2025 originated in the late 1970s, when the Heritage Foundation began collecting policy proposals from conservative minds across the country. Those ideas were published as part of a book called Mandate for Leadership. And in late 1980, it was presented to the newly elected president, Ronald Reagan. On its website, the Heritage Foundation boasts that Reagan gave each member of his cabinet a copy of Mandate for Leadership, and that, quote, nearly two-thirds of the 2,000 recommendations contained in the mandate were adopted by the Reagan administration. Since then, the Heritage Foundation has published a new version of the Mandate for Leadership roughly every presidential cycle. But make no mistake, this latest version of Mandate for Leadership, Project 2025, was written for this specific moment. It was tailored to the specific brand of ultra-conservatism that Trump has now come to represent. In an interview with the New York Times earlier this year, the Heritage Foundation's president, this man, Kevin Roberts, said that he believes the organization's role today is, quote, institutionalizing Trumpism. As more people have learned about Project 2025 and the draconian ideas it contains, it has become a political liability for Trump in his bid to return to the White House. Accordingly, he's tried to distance himself from it, posting on Truth Social, quote, I know nothing about Project 2025. I have no idea who is behind it, end quote. That claim is patently absurd and provably false.
Does such an incredible job, and they're going to lay the groundwork and detail plans for exactly what our movement will do and what your movement will do when the American people give us a colossal mandate to save America.
Colossal mandate indeed. It's taken me two types just to bind it together. This is 922 pages. It includes contributions from many Trump allies. By one count, at least 140 people who contributed to Project 2025 worked in the Trump administration. One chapter, written by former Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, Ben Carson. Another, written by Peter Navarro, the former director of the Office of Trade and Manufacturing Policy, who was recently released from prison. Meanwhile, among the groups listed as Project 2025's coalition partners are America First Legal, which is led by Trump's former senior advisor, Stephen Miller, and the Conservative Partnership Institute, which lists Trump former chief of staff, Mark Meadows, as a senior partner. Plus, Trump's running mate, J.D. Vance, recently wrote the foreword for an upcoming book authored by Heritage's president, Kevin Roberts. And then there's Russell Vought, the former director of the Office of Management and Budget. Not only did he write a key chapter in Project 2025 about the executive office of the president, he's also the president of the Center for Renewing America, another Project 2025 coalition partner, and he was chosen by the Republican National Committee to, get this, serve as the policy director in charge of crafting the GOP's official platform this year. Despite Donald Trump's attempts to distance himself from Project 2025, his fingerprints are all over it. Project 2025 is a set of ideals that seeks to galvanize Trump's movement. It's a playbook that he's ready to run with. He's just waiting for the opportunity to do so. Joining me now are Melissa Murray, a professor of law at New York University, co-host of the Strict Scrutiny podcast, and an MSNBC legal analyst. Also joining me, David Pepper, the former chairman of the Ohio Democratic Party and author of Pepperspectives on Substack, where he writes about all things politics, including Project 2025. Good morning to both of you. Melissa, let's talk about one of your many specialties, the Supreme Court in particular, this most recent term, which included some big decisions that struck down the so-called Chevron doctrine. It granted the president broad immunity from criminal prosecution. Now, in theory, neither of these are in Project 2025. But in terms of Project 2025, both of those things support the goals that this document advances.
Well, I'm so glad you asked, Ali. You're exactly right. The Supreme Court isn't mentioned in Project 2025 explicitly, but it has laid the groundwork to make loading Project 2025 relatively easy and seamless for the Republicans if they are elected in November 2024. The Supreme Court has granted future presidents sweeping immunity, has said that when the Department of Justice acts at the direction of the president, those are official acts, no matter how outlandish and problematic they are. And Project 2025 builds on that by explaining that the DOJ should be considered part of the presidency, that there should be a seamless relationship between the president and the DOJ, rather than the DOJ being an independent agency and enjoying independence from the president. That comes directly from the Supreme Court's rulings, not just this year, but earlier rulings, Trump versus Vance, Trump versus Mazars, those earlier rulings around Trump's financial records and things like that. The Supreme Court in those cases said that it's very difficult to make a distinction between the office of the president and the man himself. And Project 2025 absolutely reiterates this. So to the extent that Project 2025 needs a runway, the Supreme Court has given it one.
David Pepper, there are things in these chapters that people will read. It's not a fun read, by the way. Like, it's just not a fun read. It's not meant to be read. I think it's meant to say, we wrote it all down, so don't get mad at us when we do it. There's a lot of stuff in here that's not new to you. You've written a book called Laboratories of Autocracy, which is how we see some of the states implementing some of these rules. Virtually nothing in here is new or novel. It's just all written down in a book that could become federal government policy.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point. As your prior guest, Eric Larson, said, I'm a huge fan. We should take every crazy and extreme thing they say seriously, because as the title even says, I think what they are doing here is creating a mandate. So if they win, they claim the mandate and say, well, the people knew about it. The people voted for it. So anything in that plan, anything Trump says at a rally is fair game if he wins. And that's why we should take it seriously. And that's why the wildest things should scare us. But yeah, you're right. I wrote this book, Laboratories of Autocracy, to expose that in these gerrymandered and extreme state houses, it's just, they've gone bananas with, whether it's the crazy universal vouchers or whether it's the lack of a rule of law or putting into positions as high as the Ohio Supreme Court completely unqualified people. It's essentially Project 2025 in states is already happening. And I'm telling you from Ohio, and people in Missouri will tell you this, or Tennessee or Florida, it's terrible. It's turning these states upside down. It's a downward spiral towards extremism. It's lawless. There's not much rule of law left in these places. And so in many ways, what Project 2025 will do is nationalize what is already this downward spiral of extremism in states. So not only should we read the plan and be worried about it, you don't have to look very far in this country to see what it looks like. And ask most people in Ohio, these other states, we are seeing our state look like nothing that it was only a few years ago under these kind of approaches.
And Melissa, this is important because there are a lot of people who live in California or New York or Illinois or Massachusetts who say, well, at least I don't have to deal with some of the stuff that David's talking about. But actually, under Project 2025, you might. The agenda includes mass deportation of migrants, eliminating agencies like the Department of Education, slashing the federal workforce. And I think it's important for people to understand that this is a 180-day plan. 6 months from inauguration. So if you don't like it, a lot of this stuff might happen pretty fast. How difficult would some of these things be to undo if Americans vote for Trump and then get buyer's remorse?
I think it's really hard to unring some of these bells, Ali. I mean, much of Project 2025 is about restructuring the federal government. Many of us think that we live in states, and if we live in blue states, we don't have that much contact with the federal government. That's not true. The federal government has control over many different areas of our lives. The water we drink, the air we breathe, our environment, all of that has real implications for federal governance with the EPA. Project 2025 is not only eliminating some of these agencies, they're absolutely restructuring how these agencies work. For example, one of the things that Donald Trump did during his administration was institute what's known as Schedule F, which took away career appointees from many of these administrative agencies and replaced them with partisan loyalists that were loyal to the Trump administration. It took the Biden administration coming in 4 years later to rescind Schedule F. But what Project 2025 proposes to do in the first 180 days is to reinstate Schedule F. And Donald Trump is actually fully on board with this. This is part of his agenda as well, to replace those career appointees who do the expert work of agencies and replace them with party loyalists who are adhering to the Republican bottom line. This will have enormous consequences, and it will not be easily undone.